All right, so NVIDIA, they had their big GTC 2025 keynote, and they made some pretty huge AI announcements.
Yeah.
We're talking the Blackwell Ultra platform looks like it could really boost AI horsepower.
Absolutely.
The Dynamo AI OS aiming to make those AI workflows a lot smoother, and then the RTX 5090
Right.
for amazing graphics, but also, maybe even a boost for consumer AI too.
Yeah, could be.
They were really framing this as like the Super Bowl of AI.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
NVIDIA stock actually went down by like 3.4% during the keynote.
Yeah.
And as investors, that might seem kind of strange, right?
Totally. Yeah, that's why we're diving into this today.
We want to try and understand what's going on here. And, we've looked at a bunch of analysis on this market reaction.
Exactly.
So we're going to try to unpack, what are the factors at play that might explain this dip despite these really exciting announcements?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most interesting things for investors to consider here is just the context, right? I mean, think about it. NVIDIA's stock went up by like 240% in 2024. That's wild.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal year.
Huge.
But when you have that kind of growth, it sets these incredibly high expectations.
Yeah, makes sense.
The market's already priced in a lot of that potential future success.
Right.
So even with these big announcements,
Right.
it might not be enough to trigger like another immediate surge
Yeah.
because a lot of that growth is already baked in.
Right. So the bar was already super high.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, there's this whole, landscape of competition changing, isn't there? Like more and more companies are getting into the AI chip game.
Oh, absolutely.
You got Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI. They're all working on their own silicon now.
Yeah, it's a big shift.
So how does that, affect how investors are feeling about NVIDIA?
Well, it definitely raises questions about, long-term dominance, right? Because for a long time, NVIDIA's been the king of AI compute.
Yeah, for sure.
But now you've got these other huge players coming in and developing their own chips.
Yeah.
So investors have to think about whether NVIDIA can maintain that leading position.
Right. Like it's not just about these new products. It's also about, can they stay ahead of the curve?
Exactly. And it's not just those giants either, right? I mean, you've got companies like DeepSeek who are finding ways to develop really sophisticated AI models, but on a much smaller budget.
Interesting.
So they might not need NVIDIA's top-of-the-line GPUs as much. And then you've got, the traditional chip makers like AMD and Intel who are really upping their game in AI.
Yeah, they're definitely not sitting still.
And even the cloud providers like Google and Amazon, they're all designing custom AI silicon now, too.
So it's a much more crowded field than it used to be.
Yeah, a lot more competition.
And, we've talked about NVIDIA's performance and the competition, but I think we also have to zoom out a little bit and look at what's happening in the wider economy, right? Like, what are some of those bigger economic factors that might be playing a role here?
Well, one thing to consider is just the overall, mood in the market right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of concern about inflation still, and interest rates keep going up. And then there's the possibility of new trade restrictions that could affect, chip exports.
Yeah, that's a big one.
All of that makes investors a bit more cautious when it comes to tech stocks.
Yeah, especially those high-growth tech stocks.
Exactly. They're seen as a bit riskier in this kind of environment.
Makes sense.
And then there's also the geopolitical side of things, right? I mean, we're seeing reports that China's trying to reduce their reliance on NVIDIA's GPUs.
Oh, wow.
So that introduces another level of uncertainty.
Right, because China's a huge market for NVIDIA.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So any kind of shift there could have a big impact.
Yeah, that's definitely something to watch.
So basically what you're seeing is this kind of risk-off sentiment in the market where investors are moving away from those, potentially volatile growth stocks and looking for something a little safer.
So a general kind of pullback from those higher risk assets.
Exactly.
And then, of course, you can't forget about the whole, buy the rumor, sell the news phenomenon.
Classic.
Like NVIDIA's stock was probably already going up in the weeks leading up to GTC, right?
Almost certainly.
There was all this anticipation and excitement.
Yeah.
And then once the news actually drops, some investors who bought in early might decide to cash out, take their profits.
Yeah, lock in those gains.
And that can lead to a dip even if the news itself is good.
Exactly. It's a pretty common pattern.
So I guess to kind of sum it all up for our investors out there, it seems like NVIDIA's stock dipped despite these really impressive announcements because of a few things, right?
Yeah, a few things coming together.
First, those expectations were already sky high after such a strong performance in 2024.
Right.
And then you've got this growing competition in the AI chip market. And then the broader economic climate is making investors a little more cautious.
Definitely.
And then you've got that classic, buy the rumor, sell the news dynamic.
All playing a part.
So yeah, it's an complex situation.
It is.
But it's interesting to see how different analysts are interpreting this right. Like some are saying this dip could actually be a buying opportunity.
Yeah, I've seen that.
For those long-term investors who are still really bullish on AI and NVIDIA's role in that future.
Right. They're seeing this as a temporary thing.
Yeah, like a blip on the radar.
Exactly.
But then you've got others who are saying, short-term traders, they might need to see more than just these product launches.
Yeah, they want something bigger.
To really feel confident about, that upward momentum continuing.
They need new catalysts.
Yeah, so it's definitely a mixed bag.
It is.
But it really makes you think, what would those new catalysts be?
Yeah.
What would it take for those long-term investors to really see, continued strong growth for NVIDIA beyond just these, cool products?
Right. Like, what's the next big thing?
Yeah. What's next?
It's a great question to think about.
Definitely something to keep an eye on.
For sure.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Thanks for breaking it all down.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening.